I started playing darts just over 2 years ago, but I only started playing competitively within the last 6 months. And when I started playing competitively, I realised there's a few things that I didn't know. So let's jump in to what those are. Hi guys and welcome back to the channel. So today we're talking about competitive darts. We're talking about league matches, we're talking about tournaments, we're talking about any real sort of competitive environment. And there's a few things that I'm excited to talk about because I think that a lot of people don't really know them going in, or they might know them, but I don't really think the extent of these things is abundantly obvious to a new player. So I want to shine a bit of a spotlight on some of these things and talk about them and address them. So without any further ado, let's jump in. So point number one is that you're probably going to lose 10 to 15 points off your average. Now I realise this one is a bitter pill to swallow because you want to play to your best. We all want to be the best player we can be on the day. But when you're playing in this new environment, when you're playing in this competitive environment, it can be very, very difficult to play your best darts. And it's not necessarily always nerves. I think there's a bit of a difference between nerves and tension. You can be not nervous, but you can still be tense. You can still find it difficult to throw. And I think also as well, just playing in a new environment can be really difficult when it's loud, it might be really hot or really cold. There's people walking in your eye line and stuff, especially if you're playing at a venue where there's like 4 or 5 different boards lined up against each other. It can be very, very difficult to play. Just speaking from experience myself, I've played in venues where there's like 4 or 5 boards and someone's marking right next to where you're throwing, and then there's someone marking on that side. And it can just be very difficult to remain as focused and relaxed as you normally would be in practice. I did do a video about why you play worse in matches than you do in practice. I would encourage you to go check that out. But just for this point, I wanted to talk about how it affects you in terms of results. And for me, in my experience, it's 10 to 15 points off your average. And I think you see this with other people when you go to places like this, where everyone's kind of saying, oh, I'm just not playing as well as I can, I'm playing rubbish, I'm playing bad, whatever it may be. And I do actually believe most of these people. I do actually believe that you lose a lot of points off your average if you're not used to where you're playing. And I'll talk a little bit more in point number 3, stick around to the end, about how we deal with this, but it's important to know how it manifests. And in my experience, it's been 10 to 15 points, which can be very frustrating because you feel like you've got to a certain point in darts, you feel like you've reached a certain level, and then you go and play in a real environment, and suddenly you're playing at a level that you perceive to be way below your standard. And that's frustrating, and I get it. I would get that kind of expectation aligned for yourself early on. If you exceed the expectation, fantastic, but I think most people will probably fall into this trap. And I've seen it with myself, I've seen it with friends, I've seen it with people online. Your average will drop in a real environment. Point number 2, you're going to meet a lot of cool people along the way. Now, I like this point because I think it's something that is not talked about enough, but there's a lot of respectful people in darts, there's a lot of sportsmanship. I've really appreciated that since I started. I think when you go into something new, I think you can assume the worst for whatever reason. I don't know why. I think I did it a little bit. You kind of think, oh, are people going to be friendly? Are people going to like me? Are people going to be, you know, whatever, respectful? Or are people going to be dicks? Are people going to be like awkward? Are people going to be like trying to like play these like little tricks and games to sort of throw you off your rhythm or put you off or whatever, or just unpleasant? And maybe it's a bit of a glass half empty thing for me, but I was kind of expecting that I'd probably bump into some characters I didn't really like. And that's not been the case at all. I think on the whole, it's been a very, very positive experience. And there's been a few kind of characters that I don't really sort of vibe with, but that's not to say they were unpleasant or hard to deal with or, you know, doing anything wrong. It's just maybe personalities don't really match. But anyway, the majority of people are really cool. And I've met some friends along the way already, and I'm meeting a lot more people that I really like. And the more people that you play against, the more people you meet, the more people you get to know, you'll realize that your scene is probably quite friendly. And I think that's probably the case on the whole. As you get to know your local dart scene, if you're playing in like a local sort of venue or whatever, you'll make new friends and you will really enjoy the social aspect of darts as well, which is something that I think a lot of us can benefit from as people. Now, point number 3 is that ultimately, in order to become better in a competitive environment and a real environment, you have to play more and more in a competitive and real environment. Now, I realise this one sort of sounds a bit self-explanatory, but let me explain. Because I think when I started playing darts, I was hoping that I would get really good and then I'd go and test myself against the best players. I'd go and test myself in the competitive environment. And in hindsight, that was very wrong, because playing in a competitive environment is like a very different sort of environment to the practice environment. And if you're not used to that, you're never going to kind of reach your potential in that environment. So you might be throwing like a 70 average at home, but in the real environment, you might throw 55. I talked about that in point number 1, but you're never going to catch up to your practice average. And I do differentiate between practice average and competitive average at this point, having played more competitively in the last 6 months, because competitive average is going to lag behind. I think for most people, you're almost certainly going to be lagging behind your practice average when you're in a real environment, because it's very difficult to play in the real environment. It's very loud, there's a lot going on, there's people in your eyesight, there's people walking around, there's people walking behind you, there's people shouting, screaming, whatever. It's tough to play, and that's not even talking about things like temperature and stuff like that. So you have to get exposure to that environment. And I think the more that I play in these places and the more that I experience these tournaments and things like this, the more that I start to appreciate that I should have been doing this sooner. And I've ultimately not grown as much of a player competitively as much as I can because I've not been doing it. It's a tough pill to swallow, especially if you don't like losing. Like if you're the sort of person who's like me, where you kind of think to yourself, I don't want to turn up if I'm going to get beat. And ultimately, I do feel like that a lot of the time. I don't want to just turn up and lose. I want to turn up and win. And there's probably other people like that, I'd imagine. But unfortunately, losing is part of the learning experience. And you have to get the repetitions in a real environment in order to play to your best in a real environment. In order for that lagging competitive average to catch up to your practice average, you just have to get the exposure to these places and you have to become more comfortable. If you become more comfortable, you'll become more relaxed, you'll become less tense, you'll become just much more adept at playing in the real world against other people. And I think when I look back on myself, I definitely needed to hear this 12 months ago. I really did. And if I'd started putting this in practice a while ago, I would have been a better player now. So if you're early in your journey and you're a bit like me, where you're kind of thinking, oh, I'm not sure if I want to play in a competitive environment, I don't want to go lose, well, that's fine. But if you ultimately want to push yourself to that level, if you ultimately want to get to that destination, then start doing it now. That's my advice. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. Do let me know if you've enjoyed this or if you've suffered from these sorts of things yourselves. And if I could ask you a favor, one favor and one favor only, just hit the subscribe button because it helps the channel a lot. So thank you once again. Have a fantastic day or night or whatever it may be, and I will catch you for the next one. Bye-bye.